Everybody ready to rock? Okay. All right. Okay. The House Ethics and Oversight Committee will come to order. Would the clerk please take the attendance?
Chair Burns.
Here.
Representatives Hope.
Here.
Breen.
Present.
Churches.
Present.
Hoskins.
Here.
Wogella.
Here.
Kuntz.
Here.
Wozniak.
Here.
Harris.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have all members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Representative Hope moves to adopt the meeting minutes from June 22nd of 2023. There being no objection, the motion will prevail by unanimous consent. Before we dive in today, I do want to wish a one-day belated happy birthday to Representative Wozniak on our committee. Very happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome. Oh, let the jokes begin. All right, well, we're happy to have everyone here with us today. Welcome to everyone in the audience and our committee members, of course, as well. So at today's committee meeting, we will have a presentation from the Office of the Auditor General. Staff are here to discuss their report on the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, which was completed in August of 2023. So joining us today, we have Audit Division Administrator Yvonne Ben and Audit Supervisor Angela Schinover from the Michigan Office of the Auditor General. If you'd like to come forward and have a seat at the table. Okay. And our guests today will be kind of walking us through this report, and following the presentation, as always, members of the committee will have time to ask at least one question each. As a reminder, we do run up against session, which starts at noon, so we're going to be conscious of time. But I would invite our guests to introduce themselves. Please make sure your mic is on, and we'll have you begin.
Good morning, Chair Burns and committee members. Thank you for inviting us here today to discuss our performance audit of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights selected activities related to investigation timeliness and complaint intake. I am Yvonne Ben, and I'm an Audit Division Administrator with the Office of the Auditor General. And in that role, I oversee performance audits in various state departments, including civil rights. I have with me today Angela Schinover, who is one of our principal audit supervisors, and she led our team through this project at MDCR. It is my understanding that each of you have a copy of the report, and as we move through our prepared remarks this morning, we will at times refer to page numbers applicable to our comments if you want to follow along. Before Angela and I get started with the particulars of the report, I would like to share some brief information about the Office of the Auditor General. The OAG was established by the Michigan Constitution in the legislative branch with the responsibility to conduct financial and performance post-audits and investigations of state government operations. Our mission is to improve the accountability for public funds and improve state government operations for the benefit of Michigan citizens. Our overall goal is to improve accounting and financial reporting practices and promote effectiveness, efficiency, and economy in state government. We have about 163 employees, and 48 of us are certified public accountants. We conduct our audits in accordance with professional standards, including generally accepted auditing standards of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and also government auditing standards issued by the Comptroller General of the United States. Our performance audits compare criteria applicable to the audited entity with the activities that occurred. Our findings and conclusions provide objective and independent analysis to program management and those charged with governance and oversight to facilitate decision-making and improve public accountability. When selecting activities or programs for audit, we direct our efforts based on risk and opportunities to improve state government operations. Our audit reports are the formal, written, and primary means of communicating audit results to the legislature, audited entities, citizens, and other stakeholders. When conducting a performance audit, our audit procedures include a preliminary survey, audit fieldwork, report preparation, analysis of agency responses, and quality assurance. During the preliminary survey phase, Our teams conduct procedures to gain an understanding of the department's significant operations and related risk, to develop our audit objectives and planned methodologies. At the conclusion of the preliminary survey, we move into the fieldwork phase, where we conduct our audit procedures to conclude on our objectives. Our audit procedures typically include, but are not limited to, interviewing management and staff, reviewing key documents such as strategic plans, policies and procedures, applicable laws. We conduct walkthroughs and observations of significant systems and processes. We apply analytical procedures to key data. We examine sampled items from key populations, including inspection of supporting documentation. We evaluate potential exceptions, draft preliminary findings, and conduct due process with the auditee. We also classify our findings and form conclusions on our objectives. At the conclusion of our field work, we draft our audit report, subject it to a vigorous internal quality assurance process, obtain the agency's responses to any findings, and then we publicly release the report. Upon completion of the preliminary survey for this project, we determined that MDCR's strategic plan stated a goal of providing timely resolution of civil rights investigations on average within 6 months. However, the 2,100 investigations that MDCR completed during the period of January 1, 2021 through January 30, 2022 often took longer than 6 months. We also determined that MDCR's complaint intake process served as an important decision-making point in carrying out the department's primary purpose to receive, initiate, and investigate allegations of civil rights investigation under Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act and the Persons with Disabilities Civil Rights Acts. Again, during the period of January 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022, we determined that MDCR received just over 9,000 complaints, of which it assigned approximately 20% for investigation and denied approximately 80% of those. Inside the front cover of our report, we provide a report summary, and there you will see that we developed 2 audit objectives. The first was to assess the effectiveness of MDCR's efforts to timely complete civil rights investigations. We concluded the department's efforts were not effective. Our second objective was to assess the sufficiency of MDCR's efforts to assign civil rights complaints for investigation when required. We concluded the department's efforts were sufficient, with exceptions. In the report summary, you will also see that our report contains 6 findings. 1 considered a material condition, and 5 considered reportable conditions. We do provide a detailed definition of those classifications on pages 36 and 37 of the report, but in a nutshell, a material condition is more significant and could impair management's ability to operate a program or adversely affect the judgment of an interested person concerning the effectiveness and efficiency of the program. Whereas a reportable condition is less severe and often is an opportunity to improve programs or operations. Finding number 1 relates to MDCR's timeliness in completing investigations and is considered a more severe material condition. Findings 2 through 6 are less severe, reportable conditions and relate to MDCR's review of assignment decisions, controls over incoming contacts, documentation of verbal interviews, the customer service complaint process, and MDCR's removal of users' system access. MDCR's responses to the findings are presented immediately following each finding in our report. In those responses, the department indicated that it agreed with the findings and recommendations and described corrective actions MDCR had taken and or planned to take. Those actions included hiring additional staff, revising policies and procedures, providing training, and strengthening its monitoring over certain processes. We released this report in August of 2023, and typically we would conduct a follow-up of material findings approximately 12 to 18 months after to assess the effectiveness of the corrective actions. However, in this instance, given that hiring and training additional staff is such a large facet of MDCR's planned corrective action, and the related appropriated funding has just become available in fiscal year 2024, will likely push the timing of our follow-up back to give the department some time to carry out those activities. So Angela is now going to walk us through each of the findings. She's also going to provide a bit more detail on some of our procedures, and then we would be more than happy to take any questions you may have about the audit report.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you again, Chair Burns and committee members, for inviting us here today. MDCR's primary purpose is to investigate complaints of unlawful discrimination in employment, education, housing, a public accommodation, and public service based on an individual's characteristics, such as their religion, race, color, national origin, genetic information, sex, age, height or weight, familial or marital status, or disability. MDCR receives these complaints through their website, telephone, email, mail, and other resources. MDCR's Enforcement Division intake staff gather and evaluate the information that's necessary to determine whether to assign the complaint for a civil rights investigation as required by law. Policy requires management to review the intake staff's decisions and for the complaint and investigation information to be entered into the management information system called CRIS. For Objective 1, we directed our efforts towards looking at the timeliness of MDCR completing the investigations. When we began the audit, the department shared with us that the audit team that they had a backlog of investigations. We determined it would be helpful to assess the extent of the backlog and also to attempt to identify the steps within the investigative process where significant delays were occurring to try to help the department. We describe in the audit methodology for this objective on page 32 that our review focused on both completed and ongoing complaint investigations and included a review of a sample of completed investigations to examine MDCR's records to identify periods and reasons for significant delays that impacted MDCR's ability to complete those in a timely manner. For finding 1 on page 10, we considered this finding to be a material finding, the more severe of the 2 audit classifications. We reported that MDCR needs to significantly improve its timeliness in completing the civil rights complaint investigation to bolster the public's confidence regarding enforcement of states' civil rights laws. First, MDCR completed investigation of violations in an average of 19 months after the receipt of the complaint, which significantly exceeded the MDCR strategic plan goal of 6 months. We obtained MDCR's investigation data and calculated the number of days from the date the complaint was received to when the investigation was completed. The chart on page 10 under Part A shows the results of that analysis. In addition to our overall analysis, we selected a sample of 39 completed investigations to calculate the number of days between key steps within the intake and the investigative process. We utilized guidance from auditing standards to help determine our sample size to help ensure that the collection of sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. We identified 3 primary areas where significant delays occurred. There were 4 investigations where the MDCR did not assign investigator in a timely manner. 5 investigations, the MDCR investigator did not attempt to contact the claimant for an initial interview in a timely manner. And for 17 investigations, significant time periods existed ranging from 2 months to 17 months and averaged 4 months with no evidence of activity being performed. Second, approximately 85% of the ongoing investigations had been open for more than 6 months at the time of our review. We utilized MDCR's investigation data and identified the complaints that had been assigned for investigation but were not yet completed. The table under Part B on page 11 indicates the time elapsed from the complaints being received to the date of when the data was provided to the OAG. We determined 59% of ongoing investigations at the time of our review had been open for over 12 months to more than 36 months. Near the end of the finding, we described the 3 factors for why we considered this finding to be material. These factors include the risk that the claimant's alleged discriminatory situation or condition could linger or worsen during a prolonged investigation, the possible loss of crucial investigative evidence during the passage of time, and the burdens such as administrative, financial, and emotional tolls that long investigations could impose on both the claimants, respondents, and the department staff themselves. We recommended to MDCR to significantly improve its timeliness for completing civil rights complaint investigations, and the department agreed with our recommendation. During the preliminary survey, we identified the intake process as the key step to determining whether a complaint of alleged discrimination will be investigated and is critical to ensuring that the department is fulfilling its primary purpose of investigating complaints of unlawful discrimination. Filing a complaint with MDCR is the final opportunity for resolution of alleged discrimination outside of a claimant independently pursuing that matter in court. For audit objective 2, our review focused on assessing the sufficiency of MDCR's efforts to assign civil rights complaints for investigation when required. In the audit methodology for this objective, on pages 32 through 35, we describe the steps we completed to be able to answer this question. Specifically, findings 2 and 4 were based on a sample of 59 complaints that MDCR received between January 1st, 2021 and June 30th, 2022, or there were complaints that were received prior to January 1, 2021 and remained open, meaning that MDCR had not yet decided whether that complaint had met the criteria necessary to be investigated. Our review of complaints focused on the key steps within the intake process to ensure MDCR completed those necessary steps and to determine how long it took to complete those steps. For this objective, we had 5 reportable findings, which are less severe, and related recommendations, which the department agreed with. First, finding number 2 on page 16, we reported that MDCR managers did not review and approve the assignment decisions for 17 of the 54 sampled complaints. Further, 15 of those 17 were denied complaints, indicating only that a single intake worker reviewed and evaluated the relevant complaint information to be able to draw the conclusion that the complaint did not meet the requirements for an investigation. We also noted that managers did not provide a secondary review and approval of appeals for denied complaints. Finding number 3 on page 19, we reported that MDCR needs to improve controls over incoming contacts to help ensure that all alleged civil rights violation complaints received are evaluated and assigned for investigation when required. We noted the department did not maintain records of all incoming telephone contacts and did not have a reconciliation process to ensure all incoming emails were evaluated. Finding number 4 on page 21, we reported that MDCR needs to improve its documentation of verbal intake interviews with claimants. In our review of 59 complaints, MDCR conducted 20 verbal intake interviews. Our review noted that the department did not document 3 of the 20 interviews conducted. And without this documentation, the department's records may lack evidence to support the staff's decision. Finding number 5 on page 23, we reported that MDCR needs to strengthen its customer service complaint process to increase assurance it consistently provides outstanding customer service to those that are seeking its services. MDCR included in its own strategic plan a key goal related to its desire to provide outstanding customer service. A more robust customer complaint process would help MDCR's ability to ensure that all customer service complaints received are recorded, tracked, and resolved. It would help them to detect and address pervasive, systematic, and/or persistent customer service and emerging issues, and help improve and support training efforts for the newly hired and existing staff through the inclusion of topics that are targeted towards identified customer service issues or deficiencies. Lastly, finding number 6. On page 25, we noted that MDCR needed to establish more robust controls over the CRIS system to help ensure that users' access is removed or disabled in a timely manner for departed employees. Our review of users identified 7 of 19 individuals who had permanently or temporarily departed from state employment, and the department did not request access to be removed or disabled in a timely manner, ranging from 11 to 70 days after the departure. In addition to our findings, our audit reports often contain supplemental information. For Objective 1, on page 27, these charts provide statistics related to the basis of discrimination for completed investigations and the reasons why closed investigations were performed during the 18-month period our audit focused on. Our data analysis identified 76% of investigations completed were closed due to insufficient evidence. For Objective 2, on page 29, Part A, these charts provide statistics of the areas MDCR receives complaints of alleged discrimination for and the breakdown of MDCR's intake process decision. Our data analysis identified 79% of the complaints MDCR receives are denied for investigation. This concludes our prepared remarks, and we welcome any questions you may have related to our audit reports.
Okay. Thank you both so much. We appreciate you being here today and for going over the findings of the report with us. I'll kick us off with a few questions, and then I know we have members who will have questions as well. So my first question has to do with something that was noted under finding number 1. I know it's noted that there were several investigations that were found to have like significant periods of inactivity. How do you assess that the department is inactive on that front? What does that criteria look like?
Can address that. Thank you for the question. That analysis was completed based on information that the department themselves had documented within the CRIS system.
Okay.
The workers are asked to record their telephone calls, emails, letters, and those kind of initiation of contacts that they make with the claimant themselves. They record that in the CRIS system.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And then my other question would be, and this wasn't within one of the findings, but I know you mentioned in your opening remarks that there's a kind of a traditional time frame for the Auditor General's office to follow up with the department when they've been through an audit. But based on the fact that this kind of corrective action plan would involve hiring of a variety of staff members and the approps kind of allocation just came through, do you have a sense of what that follow-up time frame would look like, or is that still to be determined at this point?
It is still to be determined.
Okay.
You know, I mentioned that many times we go back 12 to 18 months later, but I would say probably in the neighborhood of, 24 months would be something of a good expectation for that.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. I will pass it to Representative Breen.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys being here. I personally think you are an underutilized resource with all the information that you're able to provide, because we often have so many questions and we don't know the answers. And they are frankly probably within a lot of these reports. So I have some general questions about your office and department in general. And I'm going to break the attorney rule by asking questions I don't know the answer to, because I'm really curious. I understand there are financial audits, performance audits, investigation audits. They're listed on your website. Your annual report that you have here says you have financial audits, performance audits, other, and contracted. What's the difference here? What's other and what's contracted?
I believe the contracted are contracted financial audits. We have some smaller financial audits that we do. Our staff is primarily dedicated to doing the statewide financial audits, as you can see in the annual report. So we do contract out some smaller aspects of those jobs. And then I would have to look at the footnote to understand what the others are, because the ones that you mentioned for the financial, the performance, the follow-ups, the investigations, and the contract audits, I'm not sure what falls into that other bucket.
Okay.
So be more than happy to look at that.
I have a few more questions, if
Okay.
that's okay, with the chair's permission. So now there's mandatory reports and audits, and then there's some discretionary. About how many mandatory reports are you issuing every year?
I don't know the exact number of mandatory reports, but when we have several mandated audits, and the reason I wouldn't be able to comment on each year is a lot of the mandated performance audits are on cycles. So some are on a 2-year cycle, some are on a 3-year cycle, some are a 1-year cycle, and then we do annually. We have the mandated statewide financial audit, and then we also have the single audit, which takes up a lot of our resources, as you could also see in the annual report. So the number I can't tell you, but I can tell you the way that our resources are allocated. About 62% go to financial audits and about 38% go to the performance audits, and typically the performance audits are discretionary audits.
As far as these discretionary audits and reviews that you do, what's the criteria for determining whether or not you're going to do a discretionary audit?
We go through an annual process of audit planning, and it's primarily based on, we look at our resources, what we have, and then, as you mentioned, our mandated reports, and we go through that process to see what resources we have available. And then we, from there, go into a risk-based approach to look at what we would like to do, the population of audits that we would like to do. And then we take that and we look at the remaining resources, and then we look at several other factors that go into those decisions. Things such as workload of our staff and the agencies that we may be wanting to do an audit at, other audits that we already have in process. There may be emerging issues that we need to consider. There may be legislation, pending legislation that may impact the audit. So, you know, those things are all taken into consideration when we're doing the timing of our annual plan for the discretionary audits.
So I would assume then, though, you say you have an annual plan and you have this annual process. It's not like you would meet at the beginning of the year and then say, this is what we're going to do for the rest of the year. Things come up during the course of the year?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's an ongoing process with a focus once per year to, you know, a concentrated effort once per year. But yes, you are correct. You know, it's always an in-process type of thing that we're looking at for the audits that we're going to do and things that we may consider.
And where, for the discretionary reports, where do these requests come from?
For the discretionary reports, they could come from various sources, but primarily the discretionary audits that we do come from our risk-based approach and looking at the plan that we come up with. But we can get requests from the legislature. We can get requests. We can get requests from we have a hotline, so there may be someone that calls in, you know, and may have a tip or something like that that talks to us. So those could come from state employees, that could come from citizens, that could come from someone that has a concern.
So just a few more quick ones here. And I reviewed the most recent quarterly report, which I appreciate. And I saw at the bottom there was a response to something that said, your department did not provide details regarding any inquiry, tip, or request related to these audits. To do so would have a chilling effect on our ability to obtain and evaluate sensitive, truthful information needed to achieve our mission. And I was curious about this, so I did some digging, and it appears that that was in response to some boilerplate language that said, to the extent permitted under the law, details regarding any inquiry, tip, or request related to the audit that the Auditor General received prior to initiating the audit. So it appears that the legislature was asking the Auditor General for information on audits that you were doing and why you did them. And the response was, we don't want to tell you because we don't want to have that chilling effect, which I completely understand in the context of you have maybe a state employee and it could be a whistleblower incident. And we absolutely want to protect state employees, and it's entirely feasible you guys don't have an answer to this. And if you don't, that's fine. I actually would love to have a follow-up meeting with you. If that's at all possible. So what I'm getting at here is, in the interest of transparency, as you spend a lot of time and effort on these audits, we want to understand, or at least I want to understand, where these requests are coming from. And we need to find a balance, I think, because we do have some elected officials that will come right out with a press release and say, I've asked for an inquiry or an audit on this or that or that or this, and that's a very public inquiry. But yet, in your response to what we've asked you to do, you've said, well, we're not going to tell you because of sensitivity and a chilling effect. So I'm really hoping we can find a balance here. Does this make sense? Okay. And hopefully we can follow up. And thank you for this comprehensive report on the Department of Civil Rights. And I hope that there's a lot of really positive things that weren't mentioned, because it seems like we've got some pretty damning things here, and we want to do what we can to correct what's happening in that department.
With regard to that, I would like to point out that on page 15 of the report, we do lay out the positive factors that led to our conclusion for our second objective, which we said that they were sufficient, their efforts were sufficient. And so we do include that for balance in there. So that is on page 15.
Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rep. All right, we'll go over to Representative Kuntz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for coming here today. My line of questioning is on staffing. Page 10, we talk about the MDCR having 88 employees, with 36 of them not in enforcement. And my initial question is, what is 40% of the MDCR doing if they're not in enforcement? And does this include the additional one-time funding as discussed in on page 1, in the findings on page 12, excuse me? Finding number 1 on page 12, two-part question.
So I can comment that we did not look at staffing levels. That was not a part of the scope of the audit to look at staffing levels. And then I believe your question was if only a certain percentage are investigation, what other areas are included in MDCR. Angela, they have education, they have outreach, they have various other things. Can you comment more on that?
Their internal training department for them, for their employees themselves, for training, for outreach to the employers throughout the state and to organizations. They also administer the Michigan Indian Tribal Scholarship Award. There's a small staff that handled that as well.
And I will note, Representative Kuntz, and for all members of the committee, we will have the department coming in February to speak to this report and the corrective action plan as well. So if there are any questions that Auditor General staff, maybe can't get into in detail, there will be an opportunity to get more information on that front.
Great. Do the 88 people include the one-time funding in this year's budget?
I think that's something that the department could answer more fully for
Great.
you, but
Okay.
based on the response for one that MDCR gave us, I do not believe that those are included in those 88. There
Okay.
were some limited term that they talked about that they would expand those to full-time employees with the one-time funding, and then they also said that they would be hiring additional staff, so I believe that they are not included in that 88.
And then if I have a very quick follow-up.
Yes, go ahead.
Page 11. So we have 52 people who are in enforcement. And the MDCR is telling us they have 80 to 100 cases apiece. If there are 2,405 cases with 52 people investigating, that is 46 cases apiece. Help me with the math.
Again, I think that's something that the department could answer for you.
So you turn numbers in and don't verify them?
So I think that's a question that is appropriate for the department when they come in. I think the Auditor General's team has spoken to this issue to the extent that they can. So Representative, I would encourage you to ask those questions when the department comes in
Well,
February.
but this is their report. They submitted it, and we don't know if the numbers are accurate?
Well, actually, that statement says that they informed us that their investigators had that caseload.
Correct.
And we did not do a staffing analysis, so I did not verify the staffing levels that
Right.
they indicated that they had.
Okay, thank you, Rep. We will move on to Representative Wozniak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to any complaint that comes into the MDCR, how does that affect a private cause of action, if at all? And if it takes 19 months to get a completed report, would that hold up that private cause of action?
Respond to that.
Not sure what it's by private company.
Could you elaborate on private cause?
Yeah. A private cause of action would mean an individual goes and files a complaint with the court, a court or whatever. And there's also a similar complaint with the department, the MDCR. So it takes them 19 months to come to completion. Now, how does that affect the private cause of action in the court? Does it hold it up at 19 months for completion? And at that point, if the complaint is found 76% of the time to be insufficient, does that mean that court case goes away? Or any idea?
As this audit was looking at intake and timeliness of the investigations, We did not look at the outcomes of the investigations, and so I think that that might be a better question for the department to answer. We did limit our review to the timeliness and the intake process.
Yeah, I do find it disturbing that 76% of the complaints are dismissed, and we really don't have any idea why.
Right.
But it could affect my cause of action against someone that I'm trying to get some recompense from.
Right, and I think you're referring to the chart that we have that
Yes.
Angela talked about. I do believe that that would be a good question for the department to answer of what that classification of insufficient evidence, actually does involve for the claimant and also the respondent.
And particularly when that percentage is so high at 76%. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rep. Rep Harris, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for being here. I know sometimes we ask some hard questions that you may not necessarily be able to answer, but you guys typically do a very good job for us. So I'm looking at page 28. It shows the flow chart for intakes. And was there any examination? So I come from a case management background. And so did you do any type of a flow chart or investigation into the supervisory nature of case management? What happens after this intake process? How are the reviews done from a supervisory level to make sure things are being completed or not completed as we're seeing here? Was any of that looked in, what the process is for supervisors to oversee this?
We did look at that process as part of our review. We gained an understanding of what steps the supervisors go through to review the casework, the documents that their policy requires them to review and to indicate an approval for within the CRIS system or on the documentation themselves. They also explained to us and shared with us, and we looked at the process that they go through to monitor their investigators and being able to monitor on a monthly basis the cases that they're working on, to make sure that there's action being taken in a timely manner, and that all the cases are kind of moving along is what their supervisors are asked to do.
So in your opinion, has that been a failure at this point? I mean, we're seeing a lot of timeliness issues, so I'm just wondering, is that because of the complexity of the case or poor case management on this? What's your thoughts on that?
There could be various things that are going into the timeliness problem. As we pointed out on page 11, too, in what we call the cause, we said that MDCR may need to evaluate its policies and procedures related to monitoring of timely completion of key investigation milestones, and that they should utilize the data that they had from their CRIS information system. They had a dashboard, and we thought that they could, better utilize that information for monitoring their cases. And they also had monthly monitoring reports that we felt that they could, utilize much better to monitor that.
It should be noted the CRIS system did get started for the department right after everybody went home for COVID around in 2020. So their staff were actually being trained right before they left for the pandemic. So it was very much a learning process while this audit was going on for them still.
Madam Chair, can I ask one quick follow-up?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So in regard to the CRIS system, because I'm not familiar with that, so as a supervisor logs in or an investigator logs in, is there digital tracking? Is there like a timestamp on when those things happen?
There is.
Okay.
And every step that they take was dated and time-stamped on exactly like when they would make conversation or telephone calls, letters, all of those kind of things were documented.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rep. Representative Churches.
So mine is very similar. It relates to the timeliness, and I was just wondering, since these things have been identified, for the most part, I know it's not easy to know exactly, but what are your recommendations for improving the timeliness? Are there specific things that you are going to be recommending or supports that you're going to be giving that can help alleviate some of these issues?
Well, we just made a broad recommendation that they improve the timeliness. They're, in charge of the management of their operations. And so when we came through and did the evaluation, we provided that recommendation to them, and then in their response, they laid out the corrective actions that they were going to take to address that recommendation.
Okay.
And then when we go back in to do our follow-up, that's what we'll look at. They will also have, this is their preliminary corrective action. They will also have what they call the 60-day plan, which is their more formal corrective action. And then at that point, what we do is we go in and we look at those corrective actions and see if they were effective. So they devise the corrective actions, they implement them, and then we go back and we follow up on them.
Okay. Do you know what any of their suggested corrective actions are?
A lot of it revolved around hiring staff and training staff.
Okay, so more professional development opportunities and things like that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Representative Breen.
Thank you. Two questions. Was this a scheduled audit, or is it something that came up under different circumstances?
This audit was actually, it came off of our regular audit planning that we discussed earlier. It had been quite a long time since we were at Civil Rights, and so that came into play. It was September of 2005, the last report that we had put out for a performance audit for Civil Rights, and so that was.
So this was
one of
definitely
the-
due. Okay. So it looks like we sort of had almost a perfect storm here. There was like a lack of staffing. They were working on a new system, coming on board with that just as COVID hit, which is just ripe for a hot mess. So my next question is, what's the follow-up plan to make sure that they are improving? Is there going to be a follow-up audit? Are you guys going to do another investigation? What's the timeline for that, if anything?
We do go back and we'll look at those that material finding. It's a to be determined date, but we usually go in 12 to 18 months, but I'm estimating for this one maybe 24 months. Again, that could be flexible depending on workload, what happens. We do talk to the department and we look at how they're advancing that corrective action to see if it's a good time to come in. We do want to give them enough time to implement those actions so that we can assess the effectiveness of them. So that's the time frame I would look at in general.
To what extent, if any, did you factor in major legislative changes for, like, the Elliott-Larsen Act that may have an impact on the influx of complaints? Was that factored in at all?
Actually, those became effective after our audit period.
Okay.
Those changes to ELCRA.
That was just an example, but as far
Yes.
as any other legislative changes, I don't know what, if anything, there may have been. Was that factored into the audit?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rep. Representative Wagella, who is joining us virtually, please go ahead.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So in the audit, it mentions that MDCR investigators had an average of 80 to 100 cases at any given time. And, my wife was a social worker and I was a teacher, and I know caseloads in those fields, and this would be like extraordinarily high. Not sure how it kind of translates over. So I guess my question is, and I don't know if you know this answer, but how does the caseload of these investigators compare to other industry standards or to other departments with similar enforcement investigations? And is there any recommendation to lower this number by hiring more staff, and how much might that cost? I know that was kind of a bunch of questions, but that's just where my mind has been going.
We did look at, we tried to, I should say this, we did try to find some industry standards related to this when we did the evaluation. It was difficult to come up with comparables because civil rights departments were quite different across states that we looked at, so it was very difficult. As far as the caseloads, we did not do a staffing or caseload study as a part of this audit. And as far as the cost, they would be able to comment, the department would be able to comment on the cost of the number that they're going to be hiring and the number that will be going directly into the enforcement division. The appropriated amount was $5.7 million for 2024.
Okay.
And if I may follow up, the reason I ask is because I think the the staffing component of this is really critical to determining whether, like, the effectiveness of the department. Is it a department that's underfunded and can't meet its needs because we're not providing them the resources to do so, or is there something else going on? And that's, I don't know how we can go about maybe looking at the staffing levels and making sure that people have the ability to do proper investigations, because that's certainly key in every field.
Thank you, Rep. And I will note, when the department comes before the committee in February, certainly we can talk to them about the appropriations that was granted to the department in the budget and kind of how they plan to utilize that. So I would say definitely, I think several questions that were asked today would be suitable for the department. So let's put a pin in that one, and please plan to follow up on that when they're here in February. Okay. All right, thank you, Rep. Wagella. I have a few other questions. Are there any other members that have questions right now? Okay, so my next few questions relate to finding 6. I know it's noted in the audit that there were several employees who left their employment with the state, but after they had exited their employment, they still had access to the CRIS system. They were still active users. So can you talk to us about that? Is there any evidence that those folks who were no longer employed but had access were actually utilizing the system, getting any information from it? Were they logging in essentially?
Yes, we did look at that. We were able to pull reports to show whether there was any activity for any of those users, and there was not activity for those users that we identified. In addition, there's also compensating controls that DTMB has built into place through My Login that would help to also detect if those departed employees were accessing the systems themselves.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And then of the users who were kind of had their access removed, how long did it take for, I guess, the department or DTMB to become aware that they still had access? Like, what was the time frame between like awareness and then they no longer have access?
So their process is that the HR department would identify those individuals that were leaving the employment. They would alert the applicable IT staff, and they would then make the notification to DTMB. Most of the time it was within a day or two, which was within the standards.
Okay, wonderful, thank you, that's helpful. All right, are there other questions from members at this time? Okay, all right, going once, going twice. Seeing no further questions, I think we are all set for today. I do want to thank you both for coming in, for going over the details of the report with us. We really appreciate your time and your professionalism in answering all of our questions. As I mentioned to committee members earlier, in February, we will have the department here to speak to kind of their end of things, their process leading up to and during this report, and then since that time period. So we'll make folks aware of when that date will be. And I think a lot of the questions that were asked today were answered, and then I think some would definitely be appropriate for follow-up with the department at that point in time. So again, thank you both for being here today. We appreciate it. And if members have, follow-up questions for the team at a later date, I would encourage folks to keep the lines of communication open. So thank you all for being here today. And there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.